the contingencies and one's ability to pivot from them have a greater impact upon one's destiny than one's plan. I promise you that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing and doing what I love if I had set out to achieve a certain end state. Every choice up to this point I've made by following my nose. I went to Bosnia as a journalist in the early 1990s, not so I could somehow one day end up here as your commencement speaker with this incredible honor, but because I was one of many Americans who were sickened by the television images of emaciated men and women imprisoned behind barbed wire again in Europe in concentration camps. And believe me, I didn't set out as a child to say, Mom, I'd like to become the author of books on dark topics. I wrote a paper for a law school class on US responses to the major genocides of the 20th century. And at the end of the semester, I decided I still didn't have an adequate answer to the question of why democracies had done so little to stop genocide. From the Holocaust, of course, to Rwanda, the Armenian genocide, and so forth. So I kept going in law school. I took a year off from law school to try to figure out the answer to that question, and I suddenly got the impression from talking to others that they were interested in the answer too, so I decided to pull my findings together in a book, which became A Problem from Hell, a title that my mother thinks I chose to describe my relationship to the writing process. When I was later told by publishers that there was no market for such a book, I was crushed, of course, but it didn't stop the journey. It didn't stop the writing process because I still hadn't quite figured out the answer to my question. When I went to work for Senator Obama in 2005, I went not because I thought he would run for president, but because I thought he had a lot to teach. I also realized I'd been writing about American foreign policy for a long time, but was woefully ignorant about how the Congress functioned day to day. If going forward you view yourselves as full-time students in a real-world university, it's actually difficult to go that far astray. Now, parents, please don't worry. I'm not using this very privileged pulpit to encourage dilettantism on the part of the class of 2008. Instead, I'm encouraging you, class of 2008, to focus on the next thing and take some of the pressure off finding the eventual thing. Emphasize the substance of what you will learn, not the status of what you will be called. Ask yourself, what will I take away from this? Will I learn a new skill, a new town, a new mindset? Put one foot in front of the other for as long as you can afford to, rather than trying to map your way to the winner's platform. Second, and this is important and very related, be sure to create quiet time so you maximize the chances you will ever even get to hear your gut. The French film director Jean Renoir once said, "The foundation of all great civilizations is loitering." But, class of 2008, we have all stopped loitering. I don't mean we aren't lazy from time to time. I mean that no moment goes unoccupied. And here I have a confession to make. A year or so, I was driving my car to work, and I caught myself, and ladies and gentlemen, especially students, don't try this at home, listening to a book on tape, talking on my cell phone, keeping an eye on the GPS, and texting a friend on my BlackBerry at the same time. And it gets worse. I'm now a recovering member of Pathological Multitaskers Anonymous, so I can admit this here. I don't drive an automatic. I drive a stick shift. Not good. Don't try this at home. Now, not only not good because of the physical hazards associated with my recklessness, which I am actually very embarrassed by, I've cured myself, but also not good because this moment approximates the modern American condition. Stillness is becoming as extinct as the polar bear. More people spend more time with their computers today than with their spouse or their significant other. And in a recent survey, a quarter of Americans said that the internet can serve as a substitute for a spouse or a significant other. Truly. We go for a run and we listen to music. We sit down to write and we secretly pine for the ping of the email interruption. We wait in line at the grocery store, and we use the checkout line to return phone calls. Soon, when we fly on airplanes, we'll be able to fill every airborne moment with calls and emails and connectedness. If I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, the shower is now the only place we are guaranteed to have time to ourselves. And soon, undoubtedly, our iPods will be waterproofed, and our cell phones will be devised to drown out the shower current and to amplify the human voice. All that we will have left will be that quiet, peaceful, precious time while we wait expectantly at the other side of the airport X-ray belt for our gadgets to be returned to us after a screening. And while people laugh a little too hard, think now how we already break the airport rules and reach our hands back into the dark vortex of the conveyor belt just so we can be reunited with our technology seconds more quickly. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself in that moment. There are great benefits to this kind of connectedness, and this generation will harness those benefits, I have no doubt. But we haven't wrapped our minds around the costs. Comedy Central would be happy to hire a limousine for Stephen Colbert to take him to and from work every day. But he says he wouldn't be funny if he didn't drive himself home. On his drive from New York to New Jersey, he puts the devices away and lets his mind drift with side-splittingly funny results. Many of the best decisions you make in life will come from listening not to your parents, who have great judgment, of course, not to your horoscope, not to your MySpace visitors. Your best decisions will come after you have placed a metaphorical stethoscope up to your gut and managed to listen to yourselves. These days, it can be hard to hear oneself amid the din, but just try. Third, by far the most important quality one needs in life is not, believe it or not, in fact, talent, it is resiliency. I just spent the last 4 years writing a book about a man named Sergio Vieira de Mello, who I like to think of as the most important man you've never heard of. Sergio was a cross between James Bond and Bobby Kennedy. He was a peacemaker, a diplomat, humanitarian, global troubleshooter, nation builder. He spoke 7 languages, worked in 14 war zones, and knew more than anyone else on this earth about how to deal with brokenness and violence. Tragically, Sergio and 21 others were blown up by a suicide bomber in the attack on UN headquarters in Iraq back in 2003. Now, before he died, Sergio was like Sisyphus. He pushed that boulder up the hill, and it rolled back down the hill again and again. Every time it rolled down, he retrieved it and pushed it upward, making incremental but essential progress. He managed to save as many lives as he did, less because of his judgment than because of this resiliency. When I think about resiliency today, I also think about a man named Gil Loscher. When the suicide bomber struck the UN base in 2003, Sergio happened to be meeting with Gil, who was visiting Baghdad. Gil is an American human rights and refugee advocate. Miraculously, although the bomb went off right outside Sergio's office, Gil managed to survive the explosion and was pinned beneath concrete for several hours. American medics who had none of the equipment, heartbreakingly, none of the equipment that they needed to do a proper search and rescue, improvised, and they tracked down a rusty saw in one of the offices at the UN headquarters. When they severed Gil's legs and pulled him out of the collapsed building, he was flown to a US military hospital in Germany and given a 25% chance of survival. For more than a year after the attack, tiny shards of glass would work themselves free from his skin. His face was badly scarred, and he initially had no use of his right hand, but he made remarkable progress, reacquiring the use of that hand and mastering computer-assisted prosthetic legs. He resumed writing a book on protracted refugee crises, and in 2006, just 3 years after this attack, he managed to travel 1,200 miles along the northern Thai-Burmese border to interview Burmese refugees. In one of the camps, he made a special point of visiting an out-of-the-way care center for disabled refugees run by Handicap International. But after wheeling himself across this refugee camp, he found the facility had been built atop a steep mud bank that his wheelchair couldn't ascend. Resigned to turning back, Gil suddenly saw the faces of 5 Burmese refugees peering down at him from atop the mud bank. The Burmese, each of whom had a wooden prosthetic leg, scrambled down the bank, hoisted Gil's wheelchair onto their shoulders, and carried him up the hill. Lauscher divides his existence into his first life and his second life. He says that on occasions when he's tempted to feel sorry for himself, he thinks about refugees. My whole career, he says, I've been visiting refugee camps, and without realizing it, I was getting tutorials about resilience. If they can bounce back, I certainly can. Class of 2008, life is a crucible, but whenever I too am tempted to feel sorry for myself, I now think of Gil, I think of those selfless and determined Burmese, and from today on, I'm going to think about Laura.